Russia's war machine is out of gas and out of armor. With no tanks, no APCs, and no protection left, Putin's troops are being thrown at Ukrainian lines bare and exposed. The result? Mass death. This isn't warfare, it's slaughter, and it's getting worse by the day. We take you to Toretsk. Putin has had his eye on Toretsk for quite some time. The Battle of Toretsk began in June 2024 and has been raging ever since as Putin's troops try to take the Ukrainian city, and Russia's forces are slowly getting there. By January 2025, they'd taken about 88% of the city, and the assaults keep on coming. On June 11th alone, a massive 20 combat engagements took place on the Toretsk front. Russia failed in all of those engagements, losing 35 soldiers in the process. But the point here is that Putin is pressing. He believes he can take Toretsk, and he's not far away from doing it. At least that's how it seems on the surface. The reality is that Putin's Toretsk advances have stalled out for a simple reason. Russia no longer has any armored vehicles to support its troops in the region. How do we know? Well, on July 6th, BBC Ukraine reported on comments made by the Chief of Staff of Ukraine's Spala Unmanned Systems Battalion. Operating under the call sign Perepel, that chief revealed that Russia hasn't been using armored vehicles in Toretsk for a long time. There have been no armored assaults visible for about a month and a half, Perepel explains. Instead, Putin has been forced to fall back on a tactic that has cost him hundreds of thousands of soldiers since he launched his invasion: meat assaults. The main assaults are meat grinder attacks, Perepel says. Groups of 2 or 3, sometimes those assaults are semi-successful, Perepel adds, with the small contingents of unarmored Russian soldiers occasionally managing to secure positions in dugouts. Those positions don't last long. Perepel and his comrades usually smoke them out using drones before destroying the dugouts and the soldiers inside. Putin's Toretsk campaign has devolved into desperate attempts to snatch territory with unarmored troops, and that strategy is being used because there are no armored vehicles left in Toretsk. So what, you might think to yourself? Toretsk is just one city across a massive front line that spans over 700 miles. Russia running out of armor there doesn't mean that its troops elsewhere are struggling, right? Not so fast. Toretsk is a microcosm of an emerging armored vehicle situation that Russia is attempting to deal with throughout Ukraine. While Putin has armored vehicles elsewhere, he's losing them at such a rapid pace that his military is on the verge of ending up completely naked. The meat assaults in Toretsk aren't unique. Putin has been using them throughout the war whenever his army runs out of equipment. And given the state of Russia's armored vehicle situation right now, those meat assaults may soon become Putin's only means of taking Ukrainian territory. David Axe certainly seems to think so. The former Forbes military correspondent took to trench art to blare the headline, "Mark the date, Russia is now functionally out of armored vehicles." Axe makes the point that Russia has lost around 20,000 combat vehicles since the beginning of the Ukraine war, meaning that most Russian troops are no longer fighting with the protection of armor on any meaningful scale. Instead, they're lucky if they have any armor at all, with some, such as those in Toretsk, being forced to launch assaults without any sort of protection. Writing for the National Security Journal, Isaac Seitz says that he was initially dubious about Axe's claims, but as he kept reading what Axe wrote, he realized the point being made. Russia isn't out of armored vehicles. It still has thousands it could use in Ukraine. The problem Putin faces is that a combination of attrition and poor rates of vehicle production means that Russia can no longer maintain a fleet of armored vehicles that is large enough to allow it to make any meaningful gains in Ukraine. Russia's losses have been massive. Though both Axe and Seitz quote a figure in the region of 20,000 vehicles, Ukraine's Ministry of Finance says the number is much higher. It says that Russia has lost 22,969 of its armored fighting vehicles as of July 9th, with 2 more being lost on July 8th alone. Adding to that is the loss of 11,000 tanks, creating a total armored vehicle loss of 33,969. Bear in mind that the Ukraine war has been raging for approximately 41 months. That means Russia has been losing armored vehicles at a rate of about 828 per month. For a while, Russia was able to keep pace with these losses. With tanks, for instance, Russia claimed to be producing about 1,500 per year in 2024, Seitz says. This was at a time when it was losing about 1,400 tanks per year. But even then, there were problems. Most of the 1,500 tanks Russia was producing weren't new. The vast majority were tanks that it had pulled out of storage and restored, cannibalizing other old tanks in the process. This near 1-to-1 replacement ratio is unsustainable in the long run, especially as the quality of replacements continues to decline, Seitz writes. He also adds that Russia has claimed to have doubled its production rates in 2025 and now expects to be producing several thousand tanks by 2027. However, those claims need to be taken with a pinch of salt. Vast reserves of Soviet-era tanks and armored vehicles can only stretch so far, Seitz points out. Eventually, Russia is going to run out, and when it does, the attrition it's already suffering will truly come to bear. Russia will change from being a country that can't quite maintain enough armor to sustain its assaults in Ukraine to one that experiences situations like we see in Toretsk more often. Armored vehicles will be gone, replaced almost exclusively by meat assaults that make slow, if any, progress into Ukraine. There is now a deadline on Russia's ability to maintain the war at its current scale. NATO assessments indicate that Russia could continue the war effort at current levels until 2027, assuming continued economic sacrifices and no major escalation, Sites writes. However, other analysts warn that Russia could run out of usable tanks by 2026 if current loss rates persist and if refurbishment of older models becomes unfeasible. While Russia may be able to suppress domestic dissent and continue fighting, the opportunity costs, economic, political, and military, are mounting. The long and short of it is simple. Russia's armored vehicle situation is already dire, and it's only going to get worse from here. What does this mean for Russia? We'll start with the meat assaults we've already mentioned. As we said earlier, these assaults are nothing new for Putin. Even back in January 2024, CNN was reporting on what it called Russia's relentless meat assaults that are designed to grind Ukraine down by forcing its troops to expend ammunition. The concept is simple. Putin doesn't care about his soldiers, so he sends them in waves, often unarmored, to serve as cannon fodder. The more casualties Ukraine inflicts, the more ammunition it's forced to use. Eventually, the Russian assaults succeed, not because of any tactical superiority on Putin's part, but because he's willing to sacrifice thousands of his soldiers to get what he wants. Putin's lack of care for his soldiers was evident back in 2024. Nobody evacuates them, nobody takes them away, a sniper operating under the codename Bess told CNN in January 2024. It feels like people don't have a specific task, they just go and die. About 7 months later, more Ukrainian soldiers were talking to the media about this brutal Russian tactic. One of them was Lieutenant Colonel Anton Bayev, who serves in the Kartia Brigade of Ukraine's National Guard. In July 2024, he told the BBC, "The Russians use these units in most cases purely to see where our firing equipment is located and to constantly exhaust our units. Our guys stand in positions and fight, and when 4 or 5 waves of the enemy come at you in a day, which you have to destroy without end, it's very difficult, not only physically, but also psychologically." Fast forward to February 2025 and things haven't gotten much better for Russia's troops. In that month, United 24 media reported that Putin had started using another new practice. He'd started sending what United 24 calls the walking wounded back into battle. Those wounded soldiers who should have been in hospital recovering from their injuries were instead being deployed in human wave assaults in which they were practically helpless. Just more warm bodies hobbling around until they soak up some Ukrainian bullets. These meat assaults have taken their toll. In mid-June, Russia officially passed the 1 million casualties mark, which is the most it's lost in a single conflict since the brutal attritional fight in which it engaged during World War II, and now Russia is running out of armor. Right now it has enough to sustain smaller meat assaults against Ukraine's territory. But as Axe and Sites point out, that can only last for as long as Russia has stockpiles of the Soviet-era equipment it's been restoring to send to the front lines. Once that equipment runs out, there will be even less armor to go around. Putin won't stop his meat assaults. That means the million casualties Russia has experienced thus far during its invasion might end up looking like a drop in the ocean. After all, those first million died even though Russia had plenty of armor. Many more who would have survived Ukraine's counterattacks in the past will get swallowed up into the meat grinder Putin has created once the armor runs out. Let's come back to a point we mentioned earlier. Russia has lost at least 20,000 armored vehicles fighting in Ukraine, and perhaps even more if Ukraine's Ministry of Finance is to be believed. While that obviously means bad things for Russia's future, we're already seeing the impact these massive losses are having on Russia's troops. Toretsk and its lack of armor is just one example. There are many more, as Texty reported back in February. Take donkeys, for example. Russia has been mobilizing donkeys along with some horses to shuttle equipment back and forth during the Ukraine war. Russia is trying to play all of this off as normal, Texty points out. It quotes a Russian lieutenant general named Viktor Sobolev, who says, "Now there are great difficulties in providing units and subdivisions, including assault units and groups, with ammunition, military equipment and food. And if some methods are used, such as donkeys, horses, etc., to deliver ammunition and other property to the front line, it's normal." He may not have meant to, but Sobolev has revealed that Russia doesn't have enough vehicles to shuttle equipment around. There are great difficulties, he says, which appears to be code for Ukraine has destroyed so many of our vehicles that we need to use donkeys and horses. Thankfully, there seems to be no evidence of Russian soldiers riding into battle on the backs of these beasts yet. But it is trying to deal with its armor crisis in another way. It's sending soldiers into battle in compact cars. Texty also reported on this back in February, sharing photos of Russian troops driving what appears to be a Zhigulis in Ukraine. These are compact cars dating back to the Soviet era that were never meant for use on the battlefield. They're not even new cars. Russia is sending soldiers to fight in vehicles that were already considered substandard decades ago and are now little more than cannon fodder for Ukraine's drones and artillery. Similar news has also come from Forbes, with the previously mentioned Axe reporting in March that Russia is also using Lada vehicles. Again, these aren't armored cars. They're vehicles a Russian could buy off the lot back home, and they're being used in Ukraine. Axe's report covered a Lada that had gotten itself caught up in the snow and muck of Ukraine, leaving it stranded until Ukraine destroyed it. These are the types of vehicles and animals Russia is already using thanks to its armored vehicle problem. And as with the high casualties being caused by Russia's meat assaults, this is a problem that's only going to get worse as Russia's Soviet-era stockpiles are depleted. We'll see more donkeys, horses, Ladas, and similar vehicles because Russia has nothing else it can use to transport equipment or soldiers. Still, it's not all bad news for Putin. Despite his many armored vehicle problems, Russia is still building new ones. In fact, it recently introduced the BT-3F Armored Personnel Carrier, or APC, into its ranks. Weighing up to 19 tons and capable of carrying 14 people plus 2 crew members, the BT-3F is brand new and, though not being produced in massive numbers, could at least provide some armor to the soldiers laboring under Russia's growing equipment problem. Except there's an issue with the BT-3F. Scratch that, there are several issues. Writing for Substack, Axe points out that many in Russia view the APC as a lame duck that should never make its way into Ukraine. The vehicle is vulnerable to mines and drones, and its best quality, its amphibious capability, is next to useless in the current war, Axe writes. The turretless BT-3F is so bad that one blogger would prefer to ride into battle onto a motorcycle or in a golf cart, which are equally vulnerable but at least agile, something the tracked BT-3F isn't. So bad that soldiers would prefer to ride in golf carts. That's pretty bad. And it indicates another problem that Putin has when it comes to his armored vehicles, both new and old. His soldiers don't trust the vehicles they're receiving anymore. In the case of the BT-3F, the consensus seems to be that Russia is providing its soldiers with a vehicle that is little more than an armored target for Ukraine's drones and explosive weaponry. However, Vlad Litnarovich, writing for United 24 Media, says this lack of trust extends to pretty much every other type of armored vehicle Russia has. The BMP-3, which is one of Russia's most advanced infantry fighting vehicles, comes packed with plenty of weapons but offers practically no protection against Ukraine's drones. The older BMP-2 is even worse, as it has just 0.62 inches of frontal armor that offers practically no resistance to drones, never mind the penetrative anti-tank weapons Ukraine has available. In the BMP-2's case, even small arms are capable of penetrating its side and rear, Litnarovich says. The BTR-80 can't stop rifle or heavy machine gun fire. Russia's ultra-modern T-90M tanks are plagued by a defect that causes their turrets to spin uncontrollably, almost like a disco ball, if the tank even takes a small amount of damage. The point here is that Russia's armored vehicle problems aren't new. The only change is that Russia is now running out. Even if it wasn't, its armored vehicles, ranging from the brand new to the Soviet era, are untrustworthy, slow, and almost as likely to put a Russian soldier in danger as one of Putin's meat assaults. Add all of this to a tank shortfall, which we mentioned earlier. Russia has lost around 11,000 of its tanks, according to Ukraine's Ministry of Finance. Therein lies another problem. Russia will not have sufficient main battle tanks to conduct effective offensive operations beyond early 2026 if it maintains the same operational tempo and suffers the same losses as in 2024, Axe says in his July 7th Trenchart article. That only adds to the armored vehicle problem, and it all amounts to one terrible message for Putin. Russia can't keep up its ground assaults at the same rate it's been using them during the first 3 years of the war. And that means that less territory will be captured, more soldiers will die, and Russia's armored vehicle woes will only go from bad to much worse. Still, it's not all good news for Ukraine. If there's one thing Russia still has, it's a distinctive manpower advantage. Axe points this out in his Trenchart article, noting that Ukraine needs to locate around 80,000 fresh troops for its 130 Army, Marine, National Guard, Territorial, and Air Assault brigades. It's struggling to find those soldiers, even though the country is mobilized. Russia, on the other hand, is recruiting heavily. Axe quotes a figure of 30,000 new troops per month. Putin says it's even higher than that, according to the Institute for the Study of War. It says that Putin claimed back in May that Russia was recruiting between 50,000 and 60,000 soldiers per month, meaning up to 2,000 people are signing Russian military contracts daily. All of this recruitment means that Russia's army in Ukraine, at least in terms of pure manpower, is about 3 times larger than it was when Putin launched his invasion. Will that help Russia overcome its emerging armored vehicle crisis? It seems unlikely. But with more than 20,000 Russian tanks, fighting vehicles, and other heavy equipment lying blown up or burnt out along the front line, these troops are now finally and officially out of armored vehicles, Axe writes. And therein lies Putin's problem. He has the manpower, but he doesn't have the armored vehicles he needs to make that manpower count. We're seeing the results of this issue during Russia's summer offensive. Though Russia has ramped up the pace and number of its offensives in Ukraine over the last couple of months, it's not capturing anywhere near the amount of territory Putin would have hoped to capture. The Telegraph says Russia's troops are advancing at a rate of about 5.5 miles per day, but that's simply not enough. There are no big city captures. Instead, Russia is taking scraps of territory while relying ever more heavily on meat assaults. With armored vehicles now becoming such a major problem, the future looks bleak for Putin's invasion. Russia's leader will keep pushing. He'll continue to sacrifice thousands of his soldiers to take Ukraine, but the portions of territory he snatches up with each assault will only grow smaller as the armor disappears. And eventually Russia's ground assaults will practically stall out as the piles of bodies grow and Putin realizes that the war of attrition he created has crippled his own military. And while all of this is happening, Ukraine has just broken Russia's backbone. Ukraine has launched a deep strike targeting a key link in Russia's ammunition production chain, meaning it's not just a lack of armor Putin's forces now have to worry about. Find out more in our video and remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more videos covering the collapse of Russia's military. And thank you, as always, for watching.